Hello, my happy corrupting wargamers. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about an exceptionally important subject in Warhammer. It's playing by intent and sportsmanship. A lot of people confuse what playing by intent actually means, and they think it just means, oh, you can do whatever you want. That's not true. So in this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a list of questions that I want you to make sure that you ask your opponent before every single game that you play. And when you ask those questions, it's going to make sure that you're never going to get caught by any gotchas. And then what I encourage you to do is also answer those same questions for your opponent, so the same courtesy is extended towards them. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what playing by intent actually means and how to actually play by intent, and not confuse it with some things I see when people say they're playing by intent. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a live list overview of just the little 2-minute elevated pitch spiel that I give my opponent before we ever play, so that they understand what my army does, so that they are not going to be caught unawares. And I recommend that all of you kind of practice this little speech so that you can do the same thing for your opponent. Because one of the best ways to make sure that everyone's going to have a fun and engaging and fair game is that before every single game, you just spend 2-3 minutes and you essentially just give a brief teaching of your army to your opponent. Okay, cool. So let's just jump right on into this stinking thing. I'm just super tired of seeing headlines like this on YouTube where people are saying there's 40k is a bad competitive game. It's really frustrates me. So what we're going to do is we're going to set out to solve that problem. Let's talk about a little bit of sportsmanship. There's lots of these little sportsmanship rules in 40k, just like there is in basically every single sport or game in the entire freaking world. And similar to those games and sports, many of these sportsmanship rules are written and some are not written. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that everyone is aware of them in this video and how to, do them successfully. One of the big issues where people are not playing sportsman games is it causes this really big fake divide between your casual and your competitive players. There should be no divide between casual and competitive players. The only difference being that when you go to a tournament, maybe you're bringing optimized unit loadouts, and when you're playing casually, you're not bringing optimized unit loadouts. You should still be playing as hard as you possibly can in the game. Everyone wants to win. You're not playing a game in order to lose. We're going to play the game to do the best that we can. The only difference between competitive and casual should be the actual list that you're bringing. All right, let's talk right about the questions. We're going to jump right into this because this is not going to be a super long video today. How can you protect yourself against the tryhards? So just ask these questions at the beginning of every single game. First question, how much do you give up on assassinate and bring it down for secondaries? Very easy. What that's going to tell you immediately is, A, is it worth it for me to plan a fixed secondary game around kill secondaries? Or do I need to plan on not having kill secondaries for my fix? Or should I just do tactical secondaries? Then you're going to ask them, do you have access to advance and charge? Do you have access to fallback and shoot and charge? These are really important abilities that completely fundamentally change the way that you're going to deploy your army and some of your strategy later on in the game. Like, for example, if you know that this opponent has the ability to fall back and charge, sometimes you don't want to consolidate and tag them. So it's really important to understand that. Do you have access to free CP? Very important to know, because especially if you're playing like Chaos Space Marines and you don't know that two different Chaos Lords can get full rerolls to hit and wound in the fight phase, that's really important for you. Can you affect my CP? So for example, do you have the ability to make my stratagems cost more CP? Pretty important question, because that'll change your entire gameplay. What is your melee threat range turn 1? This is one of the most important questions to ask against anything like your orcs and your world eaters. Because if you don't understand that world eaters can very easily, reliably move 22 inches turn 1 and still charge, then you're just going to lose because of a lack of knowledge that is very easy to give you. So ask that question. Then you ask, what is your shooting threat range turn 1? Because your opponents are typically going to have some really scary shooting and some really non-scary shooting. And what this question does is it allows them the ability to say, oh yeah, so this is my main shooting platform and it's got 48-inch range. So what you can say is, oh, okay, at that point in time, I can't be out of your range. So I either have to be hidden or you can get me. And that's just important for you to know in deployment and your staging for your future turns. Then you go, do you have scout? Do you have infiltrate? Because this will change your deployment really dramatically. If you didn't know that he has a Death Watch night squad that can infiltrate 9 inches away from you, it's pretty important for you to have that future knowledge. Then do you have any reactive movement? And what do I mean by a reactive movement? I mean stratagems such as Phantasm or the ability Blood Surge, right? So Phantasm, for example, at the end of my movement phase, you get to move. If you don't know that and you're going to go play Eldar, it's just not a fun game because you're never going to be able to plan on his movement, which means that you're going to have a really bad experience and it really encourages getting salty. Same thing with World Eaters. They have an ability called Blood Surge. If you don't know this, then it's not a fair game. So when you shoot the Khorne Berserkers and World Eaters, if you kill a model, they get to move forward D6 inches. You have to know that so that you can plan accordingly for it. So ask these questions. Do you have reactive moment? And then the last question I always like to ask my opponent is a very simple one, but it's a very, very impactful one. So this is what I do. I say, do you have access to any other weird game-changing rules that you wish someone would have told you about before you were playing against your own list? So what this question does is it really is a big catch-all. So for example, one of the ways that I would answer this question, well, hey, so I have an ability called a Squig Bomb. And what it does is if you're within 12 inches, I don't need line of sight. And I absolutely do not need, you can be engaged in melee. It doesn't matter. It breaks all rules of the game. And I just basically cost 2d3 mortals once per game. So it's a really important thing that my opponent is aware of, right? And then the other thing another really good example is one that I use with Grey Knights all the time, okay? Grey Knight Players, I highly encourage you tell people this because this is a gotcha if you don't tell them, even though you might not think it is. It is. So they have a stratagem called the Mist of Deimos. And what Mist of Deimos allows them to do is when you move within 9 inches, they get to pick that unit back up in a strategic reserve. Well, at that point in time, they can also then rapid ingress for another CP in the exact same movement phase. So even though it's not like they're cheating by not telling you about it, but it is 100% a gotcha because that's just not a strategy that people would ever think about. So you just need to let your opponent be aware of because it's a really strange rules interaction that just doesn't come up anywhere else in the game. So they just need to be aware that it's possible. You don't need to tell them that you're doing it. You just need to tell them that it is a possibility. Perfect. All right. So what does playing by intent actually mean? Well, all playing by intent means is that you verbalize your freaking intent. And then what that does is it allows for you and your opponent to basically play the game together, trying to beat the rules of the game to make sure that both of you are successful in what you are trying to accomplish. This, of course, does not mean that both of you will win, but it means that if I am trying to accomplish, let's say, a 6-inch charge, then I know that I need to roll a 3-inch advance. So what I do is I look at my opponent in the beginning of my charge phase. I say, okay, cool. So I need to be able to move my model this far so that would give a 6-inch advance or a 6-inch charge. If I roll a 3-inch advance, that'll move me 9 inches up the board. Do you agree that would make a 6-inch charge possible? And your opponent takes a look at it and they say, yes, I agree. Or they might say, actually, no, because of the way that you have angled, I believe that will make it a 7-inch charge. And at that point in time, both of you get to go, okay, and you agree on one of those numbers so that later on in the game when you're rolling a charge, you don't have your opponent go, no, see, that's a 7-inch charge. No, because you both already previously agreed that it's a 6-inch charge. So what you did is you both worked together to make sure that the intended result of the game was correct. Perfect. What's another little thing that's really important as far as this is concerned? Say I will be deep striking here at the end of my movement phase in order to score Investigate Signals. Let's say you drew Investigate Signals. Hey, I'm going to deep strike my Storm Boys at the end of my movement phase. Well, so then we keep going, and let's say at that point, I just forgot to deep strike my Storm Boys, even though I've already declared it. Well, at the end of the round where you're like, where you're calculating your points, you go, shoot, I forgot to deep strike my Storm Boys. Well, if you've already discussed this with your opponent, if I'm playing a game and my opponent says, crap, I forgot to deep strike my Storm Boys to score those Investigate Signals. If we had already discussed that in the movement phase, me as the opponent, I'm like, oh, no problem, man. Of course, go ahead and put them there. You had declared that was your intent. We just both forgot to have you do it at the end of the movement phase. That is playing by intent because we've had the pre-discussion. No one is getting surprised by anything. Verbalization allows for us to understand what our opponent's intentions are. Now, let's talk about what playing by intent does not mean. So basically, it's just kind of a flip, right? Oh, well, so let's say, here we go. Oh, I meant for this model to be out of line of sight. I did not verbalize it. Let's say that you've got Magnus, and Magnus has these huge wingspans, and his wings are clearly sticking out of a ruin. Well, you're getting ready to shoot them in your shooting phase, and your opponent put him there in his movement phase. So like an entire turn ago. I would not allow my opponent to take that movement back if it is a very obvious thing. Unless when my opponent had moved the model, he's like, okay, cool. So what I'm doing when I'm moving my model into this position is I'm just going to make sure that you're not going to draw a line of sight. Do you agree? At that point in time, the onus is on me to say, oh, actually, if I come over here, I think I will get line of sight. But if my opponent never said that and they just plopped him down there haphazardly, all right, man, you got to play better. Like, don't put your model down there. So Playing by intent doesn't mean that you get to take everything back. No. It just means that you and your opponent work together to verbalize and that you work together to make sure that you actually get the intended results of your phases. Another really horrible example I see people do all the time is, let's say that you have to score behind enemy lines for your secondary this turn, and you're planning on doing it with a charge. You say you got a 7-inch charge to get behind enemy lines, perfect. But let's say you fail that 7-inch charge. Crap, I didn't score behind enemy lines. But I hear people say crap like this all the time. They're like, oh, crap, you know what? I really should have deep striked my unit to score behind me lines in case I failed this charge. Do you mind if I go back and change that? The answer is no. Or the answer is yes, I super do mind. You may not do that. That's not okay. That means that you planned poorly for this. Now, if my opponent had said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and like I did in the previous example, I'm going to deep strike my Storm Boys here to make sure that I score behind me lines, and I'm also going to try to attempt this 7-inch charge to get a 5 on behind me lines, and they forget to do the Storm Boys, of course, at that time, I would allow them to go back and do it, simply because we have verbalized and agreed that's possible and that it should be happening. But you don't let your opponent play an entire turn and realize they should have planned differently and go back and do something different. That's not okay, because now you have future knowledge of the game. Let your opponent learn from that mistake so that they do better in the future. That's not playing by intent that's just called taking advantage. So, super little quick sportsmanship niceties. No gachas. We just don't play gachas. And sometimes it can be a fine line of what beating someone tactically is and what playing by a gacha is. It can be a fine line to distinguish. But basically, here's what it is. You don't need to reveal your game plan at all. You just need to reveal possibilities to your opponent. If your opponent is saying things like, okay, cool, so what I'm going to do is I am going to move here and I'm going to make a 7-inch charge, and you have, say, a stratagem that makes your opponent -2 to their charge, at that point in time, you would say, oh, hey, I understand you want to move this and it looks like a 7-inch charge. Just so you're aware, I do have a stratagem that will make you -2 to this charge. So it's actually going to be a 9-inch if you go for this movement. That's how you play without gachas. You just tell them possibilities. You don't need to tell them your plan. That's all it is. So let's do real fast. I'm just going to give a pre-game overview of my army. And this is something I encourage literally every single person to do every single game you play. Because you don't know your opponent's knowledge. Maybe your opponent has never played Orcs. Maybe your opponent has never played Grey Knights. Maybe your opponent has never played against World Eaters and they have no idea how it operates. So go ahead and take this opportunity. You just put the first 5 minutes of the clock. Both you and your opponent get 2.5 minutes just to do a brief overview of your army to help each other learn the game better. So I'm going to give you a live example of how I do with mine. Now I've got my army loaded up into the TTS view, and that is how I'm going to do it. Although, of course, when I do this, typically it's going to be in person, but I'm just going to use TTS right now to make my point germane. So let's just go on over into that view, and here we go. So this is my Orc Army, and this is how I will describe it to my opponent. Okay, cool. So you don't have much experience into orcs, so just let me take a minute or two and kind of give you a brief rundown of how it works. So basically, I have an army rule called the WA. When I declare it's at the beginning of the battle round, not the turn, every unit in my army is going to get access to advance and charge, everyone's going to get a 5-up invuln, and everyone's going to get +1 attack and +1 strength. And it lasts for that entire battle round. That's my army rule. So let me tell you my units that I have. I have 2 units of Beast Snagaboys led by Beast Bosses. These guys are +1 to hit because of the Beast Boss, and the combo here is they get to reroll hit rolls against monsters and vehicles. My Beast Boss himself actually gets devastating wounds on the charge, and he has anti-monster vehicle 4-up. So when they charge in against a monster vehicle, I basically just get to reroll hit rolls, and I fish for sustained hits 1, which can give me a lot of potential devastating wounds into monsters and vehicles when I charge. So be aware of that. This first unit has a upgrade called Follow Me Lads, which actually makes them move 8 inches instead of 6 inches. So when they get out of their truck, it's an 11-inch threat range. Be aware of that. Then I have a unit of Flash Gits. These guys actually shoot much more than you would expect from orcs. They're going to have like 4 shots each, and they get to re-roll hit rolls. They only hit on 5s, but they explode on 6s. So they have a really decent shooting attack. It's AP 1 damage 2. But it's very, very threatening, and especially since you don't play with orcs, just be aware that I do have access to that, and it's a really good Overwatch because I get to reroll hit rolls in Overwatch also. Then I've got a unit of Knobs, and they're going to be led by a War Boss. The War Boss adds +1 to hit and -1 to wound to the whole unit. These are my can openers. They just run up, and they have a bunch of AP 2 damage 2 attacks, so that's my can opener unit. Then I have 2 units of Gretchen. These guys are mainly used for move blocking, so like screening, and they also can potentially generate me some CP by being on an objective in my command phase. Then I've got Big Mozrog Scragbad. He is going to be the biggest tank in my army. This guy is T10. He's got 9 wounds. He's got a 4-up invulnerable save and a 4-up Field of Pain. And one of my stratagems I have is -1 to be wounded, so I have access to that, which can make him exceptionally durable. He also hits like a truck when he charges, so be aware that he is a problem unit for you. Then, just wrapping up real fast, I've got a 6-man unit of Squighog Boys and a Knob on Smash Squig. These guys all have Anti-Monster Vehicle 4-up, and the Knob actually has an upgrade that gives him Devastating Wounds. So he's going to have Devastating Wounds, Anti-Monster Vehicle 4-up. So I've got a lot of those combos in the army. Lastly, they also have this ability called a Squig Bomb, where once per game, after a normal move, I throw them both, and if I roll a 2-up on them, then they cause D3 mortar wounds. So it's only once per game, but it's super important to be aware of. Then I've got these 2 units of Defcoptas. These guys have okay shooting. It is twin linked, and it's AP2 damage 3, but it's orc shooting, so it's hitting on 5s. They also have an ability to cause a little mortal wounds when they fly over you, but it's not super impactful, although they do have the grenades keyword, so I can do some combos to give more mortal wounds than you're expecting from them. And then finally, I have 4 trucks to transport my guys in. So that is my army. All right, guys, and that's it. I mean, it's fairly practiced. I think it takes me like 2.5 minutes to go through all that. You don't need to speak as fast as I do, and that's the fully in-depth version. So let's assume that my opponent just doesn't know orcs at all. That's going to be the full in-depth version. You don't have to go that in-depth every single time, but that is what I encourage everyone to look at doing when they are playing Warhammer 40,000. This is going to make you guys have much more fun and engaging games. You're going to be competitive, and people are never going to be feeling like they got cheated out of it. Just discuss your games together, guys. Play this game together. Try to crush your opponent, but play the game together. That is my recommendation. It's going to make for much more fun games. I always have fun games, and people always have fun games against me because we always try to play the game together. Everyone's going to get salty every once in a while. I'm not talking about not getting salty because you had 6 triple ones in a row. Like, that happens occasionally, okay? Like, you're allowed to be salty because of a bad dice roll every now and then. But if you play the game intentionally together to have fun, you're going to have fun, and you're going to become a much better player by following these rules. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for your attention, and I'll be up with you next time. Bye-bye.